Thank you to this video. We're going to discuss chapter 25, Production and Growth. Remember, this is a book of Gregory Mankiw, Principles of Economics. So we need to concern, or we need to wonder about the big difference around the world. Everybody knows it. So for example, we already know and we're conscious that there is the average income that we have in different countries that we call the developed country to the poor countries are huge. So naturally, when we compare the average income of United States, Germany, or Japan, and we make this comparison with poor countries as India, Indonesia, or Nigeria. So definitely, these large differences, as a consequence, we have a problem in quality of life. So what is quality of life? Naturally, the consumption that you can achieve as, for example, education, health, food, clothing, entertainment, public parks, and all these aspects is what we understand as quality of life. Naturally, with this situation, so the differences between those countries are represented as, for example, in better nutrition, safer housing, better healthcare, longer life expectancy, more cars, more telephones, more television, more goods and services in general. So for the United States case, in the past century, it increased of 2% of average income. Remember, we are talking about real GDP, which is really matter. If you're not familiar still with real GDP, I invite you to review the previous video of chapter 24, with the consequence of doubling every 35 years with 2% of average income. And then the current generation naturally face a better economic prosperity than other generations. Other interesting cases case studies are Singapore, South Korea, or even Taiwan, because they had around 7% of increase in the average income or the real GDP. So with this pace, it doubles the average income each 10 years, each decade. Or other outstanding case, as now is the second most important economy around the world, is China. They represent 12% per year. They increased during the last century, year by year. Compare, or in other side, the other side of the coin should be, unfortunately, African countries in general. So Zimbabwe is the most famous case, where from 1991 to 2011 it fell 38%. So it means that we are comparing real terms. So people were 38% poorer than before in terms of purchasing power. So we need to establish what about the difference. Why do we have those countries with this huge average income level and others with so low? And then actually the rich countries, they are keeping their standard of living or maybe increasing it. Obviously it's harder because the production is now high, and to keep high is not easy, and even to increase is not. It's a challenge, but they keep doing. Then the idea is like to establish like kind of policies of increasing the average income for poorer countries and actually to follow other countries. Then we try to establish the forces that determine these variables. Then, in order to study best, we're going to focus on GDP in real terms. As we discussed in previous chapter, maybe there are several detractors of GDP, but at the end of the day is the best number that we have to make some real comparison between two countries. And then we need to figure out the determinants in long run. How come? In order to establish what should be kind of a receipt to these poorer countries to reach a better standard of living. And then this comparison should be natural, the real GDP, but per person, what really matters. Then all the core of this chapter should be on productivity. So the productivity as a definition we can understand as the amount of goods and services that are produced for each hour of a worker's time. So if one single worker produces an output faster than other worker, naturally this worker is more productive. If we are talking the same situation for a firm, so this firm should be more productive. And when we increase the question and we talk about the countries, a country that is able to produce the same quantity of goods and services in a more efficient time spending, naturally this country is more productive. So then we're going to establish this link between the productivity and some economic policies that they can provide or take you to better standard of living. So then the idea is like to start talking about the economic growth around the world. So here is an important table to summarize some interesting countries. As you have noticed, we have two different sides of the coin. From one side we have what we call the developed countries as Japan, Brazil, Germany, Canada, United States, United Kingdom. From other side we have what we call like some countries to in path to be developed countries, so like medium average income countries, that's Brazil, Mexico, even China, Argentina, and other that we consider poorer countries as India, Indonesia, Pakistan, Bangladesh. So here we are measuring the real GDP is measured in 2010 dollars. So remember, this is the base year. Again, if you're not familiar with the real GDP, go to the previous chapter. Otherwise, it could be kind of busy words that you will hear and you'd understand the point. So here we have the period. We have the period most of the time like over a century for all the countries. And here we have the real GDP per person at beginning of period. So here the beginning of period, so we have the real income. So it makes able to compare to other years because we are talking about real GDP. So here, as you can see, United Kingdom was like the richest country from this list, and the second position we had United States. However, both started at the same time, 1870. And here we have like some countries with extremely low income. So here we have the income of around 700, and this is naturally like most of the time per year, right? So here it means like, for example, around $100 per year was experimented during the first part of the century 20th for Mexico. And here if we compare, here is like a little bit more than 1,000 per month, a little bit. So here we have the situation at the end of the period. The situation changed a lot. So we have an important increase for almost all countries, and maybe some differences between Japan, because it started like far behind. And then this was provided by an average growth rate higher, because was Japan with the higher economic growth rate. And then the lower was like Bangladesh, Pakistan, Indonesia, and United Kingdom. So surprisingly, but even that, because it started at a really good point, it remains at one of the most important countries in terms of standard of living measure with the GDP real per person. And here we have the all difference for that countries. Naturally, the higher percentage that you grow, the better standard of living you had at the end of the period. So this is the total income that vary per person over time, and this is the kind of the important conclusion that we have here. The constant of the pace of increasing can guarantee at the end of the day better standard of living for the countries. So the productivity and its role determinants. So why productivity is so important? So remember, we want to start better standard of living for those countries, measure in terms of real GDP, and the real GDP is the capacity of producing goods and services, and for this capacity of producing goods and services you need a good productivity. So then the productivity naturally is associated to standard of living. So in order to understand better that idea, is a normal textbook example, the situation of Robinson Crusoe. Robinson Crusoe is a guy that is stranded on a desert island by himself. He's complete alone. Then he catches his own fish, he grows his own vegetables, and makes his own clothing. So the production of those goods is a simple economy. And then the productivity or the capacity of producing goods and services in the less time possible determines the standard of living. So then the productivity, as you already know, is like the quantity of goods and services produced from each unit of labor input. If this guy is good at all the activities and with fish, vegetables, and clothing, he will live okay. Otherwise, the situation is not going to be so good. So then, as you can see, consumption is tied to production. If you have good production, naturally you can face good consumption. Otherwise, you cannot consume anything because you don't produce not anything as well. So GDP measure the total income earned by everyone in the economy, and at the same time it measures the total expenditure. So the situation or the identity is that the economy's income is naturally equal to the economy's output. So at the end of the day we can conclude something really important. Americans live better because they are more productive than Nigerian workers. So for this reason, we face better standard of living. And remember the first video that we have recorded. A country standard of living depends on its ability to produce goods and services. If you are not good at producing them, you're going to face bad results, a bad standard of living. So we need to understand why some countries are better producing goods. Okay, because if Nigerian workers, they are aware that they need to be more productive, why they aren't? It's a simple statement, but really strong to have this increase in production. So the point is how this productivity is determined. So for example, Crusoe will be better at catching fish, better fishing poles training in island conditions. If this situation is fulfilled, naturally this person will have a better standard of living. All this stuff we can summarize in some important facts. Physical capital. What is physical capital? Tools. We have like fabrics. We have machines. Human capital, like education, natural resources, supply, and technological knowledge. So then, the workers naturally they are more productive if they have tools to work. For example, woodworkers they need to use saws, lathes, I don't know the pronunciation of that, drill presses. And then a worker with basic tools can make less furniture each week than a worker with sophisticated equipment. So this is an important fact. If you don't have like enough capital, physical capital, you cannot be productive as the other people. So then we are considering a factor of production. So this is an input. So capital is an input and you put it in the production process and you have as a result an output. So for example, lathe was before an output in a previous process. And capital can be used to produce more capital. So maybe sometimes the capital is like machine that you need to produce another machine and this machine is able to produce some shoes, for example. So then, the human capital. The human capital are all the knowledge and skills that workers acquire through education, training, and experience. So for example, the early childhood programs as grade school, high school, college, on-the-job training. And naturally there is a connection between human capital and physical capital because this is fundamental to produce goods and services. Other situation about productivity, not physical capital, not human capital, but natural resources per worker. So inputs into production are provided by nature. So for example, land, rivers, and mineral deposits. And these natural resources per worker can be split in two branches. Renewables. So trees, for example, because a seedling can be planted again and you're going to have trees again. And others non-renewable as oil because you face a limited supply. So the case of United States is important, for example, supply of agricultural lands. So you can associate with a high productivity for agriculture. Other case of Kuwait and Saudi Arabia because they have important oil reserves and this is another important fact to have better standard of living. Other case is the case of Japan because Japan does not have important natural resources. However, they import all necessary resources and export manufactured goods. Other important fact of productivity is technological knowledge. So the technological knowledge could be the understanding of the best ways to produce goods and services. So for example, if you compare 1 century ago, a lot of people work in the country, in the agriculture area. However, now we have much more production because we need to have more supply because we are more people. However, the concentration of people in country areas is lower. Why? Because the technological advance. Due to these techniques and machines and physical capital that we have in that places, we can provide enough food for all people. So another part is the common knowledge. Because for example, an example is the case of Henry Ford because he introduced assembly line production and other car makers followed. So this is common knowledge provided to more people. So for one case, we have the proprietary, which is just known by the company that discovered it. So for example, Coca-Cola is an example. No one knows his recipe. And the other case, pharmaceutical companies have the property just for a specific period of time. It's what we call patents. Then, this technological knowledge refers to the resources expended transmitting this understanding to the labor force. And then, technological knowledge is the quality of society's textbooks, whereas human capital is the amount of time that population has devoted to reading them. So this is an important phrase that summarizes the difference between technological knowledge and the human capital, that they are naturally related. So here we have an interesting part that a picture is worth 1,000 statistics. So we're going to see this situation. Sometimes the gross domestic product is not easy to understand because we just have numbers. However, we're going to have some interesting situation of pictures of some average families in 3 different countries: UK, Mexico, and Mali. So those photographs we have the family outside their homes with all material possession. So it is expected that richer countries, they have more possession and better housing than the poorer countries. So then we're going to face different standard of living. So for example, UK is an advanced economy which around $36,000 income per year. Then they face almost no population in poverty. A poverty is measured as a standard of $2 per day. And then we have 5 out of 1,000 children die before age 5. And we have like 98% or population that should be in high school, they are. Other situation in the middle is Mexico. Mexico, they face $15,000 per year, almost half of that situation. 5% live in poverty, so naturally more than UK. We have a higher rate of death for children before age 16, and 71% in high school. Other situation is in African country Mali, with just $1,000 and 3/4 lives in poverty, and we have 176 children that they die before 5, and we have around 31% in high school. So at the end of the day, this GDP represents this situation. Have a look here. Imagine what is the situation of that family. This is a UK Britain family. Naturally, this is like kind of old. I would say that 15 years old, something like that, because of the machines and devices. They are kind of old. However, they have several properties. You can see here. You can freeze the image to have a look. Then we have here the Mexican ones with 2 children more. They're happier, I guess. However, you see here the condition of the house and all here the possessions. So this is an important fact. You can freeze to have a look. And then the other part of the situation of Mali. You can see the physical possession is kind of bad. They don't have too much. The tools, it looks like really rudimentary. And the construction of the house too. And you have you can see here a lot of children. You can freeze to have a look at that. So here is an important thing that we are going to face in different courses of economics: the production function. So the production function try to represent at the end of the day the GDP, because it describes the relationship between the quantity of inputs used in production and the quantity of output from production. So here is a function that you Probably you have seen in mathematical courses that you have here in dependent variable, here the independent variable, and this independent variable is a function that is composed of four here variables. So in natural a multivariable equation. So here y stands for the quantity of output, could be related with the GDP, could be related with expense, could be related with income, which is actually like a synonym. Here we have L, which stands for the quantity of labor, quantity of people. K, the quantity of physical capital. Then we have the H, the quantity of human capital. N, the quantity of natural resources. And this F stands for the function of those inputs. The A, it's outside because this is not a variable. This is considered as a constant, which is a kind of adjustment of technology of those inputs, because naturally you can put all the same quantities to different countries, but if you do have the same technology, the production could be quite different. And then this is important that we are talking about constant returns of scale. This is a normal like definition of production function, because it summarizes, or the idea is like, if you doubling all inputs, the output will double as well. So here is like mathematically you multiply both sides by x, but have a look here, you'll not multiply the constant, just the variables. And then here we're going to have an example. Imagine that the production function is y is equal a, which is the technology, multiplying all the inputs, labor, capital, human, and natural resources. And you multiply all by x, and then the variables by x. You just collect x, and as you can see here, x is elevated to 1. So when this is elevated to 1, it represents constant returns of scale. Again, if you double all the quantities of this, you are going to have as a result double quantity of y. Then let's going to make a trick. Everything over L, or x is equal to 1 over L. Why? Because remember, all the time we focus on real GDP but per person, which is more practical. And then we just make all the variables over L, even the left side, because we are making balance, those the same situation in both sides. So then this y over L is what is called output per worker, or GDP per worker. So then you're going to have here this L over L is naturally 1. And this situation you're going to have everything per worker. So K over L, physical capital per worker, human capital per worker, natural resources per worker. So this is really interesting, and we're going to have a look definitely afterwards to this production function. So taking again our discourse about productivity, about understanding the standard of living, we already saw about the productivity so important and some determinants of productivity. And here is an important question that we have. Are natural resources a limit to growth? So currently we are around 7.5 billion of people. So we are more than 4 times than a century ago. However, we are facing higher standard of living. So maybe before there was some concern about non-renewable resources, but the technological process has guaranteed that we have expanded these limits. So then we are trying to be more environmental friendly. However, it's some questionable remark, because we know that we are closing to face an environmental crisis. However, we have experienced better efficiency in cars with the use of oils and oils in general, and for example the use of energy for cooling on warming houses is better, and recycling is helping in some way. And then we're going to start to talk about how government can provide better standard of living to the society. So the first thing is saving and investment. So naturally it's important to produce goods and services because it guarantees the possibility to have better standard of living. But there is a government role here to make like bigger expansion in that. So naturally society can change the capital they have. So for example, they can invest core resources instead of consume, devote them to capital accumulation. So as you know, in economics always we are facing a trade-off. So more capital, then less resources to produce goods and services. Then the idea is like we consume less and we save more. So then this way government can define some policies that can at the end of the day encourage better standard of living. Here we're going to discuss the government situation of diminishing returns and the catch up effect. So imagine the situation that the government is facing like higher savings. So then naturally the fewer resources are needed to make consumption goods because people are consuming less. And we're going to devote resources to make more capital goods. So then we are going to have capital stock increases, more rapid GDP, because we're going to improve productivity. But it's important to know that stock capital rises could face diminishing returns. What's that? It's like you can increase more machines, but these machines are not the increase that they provide is not higher than the one before, because naturally we are the same people, we have the same capacity, we remain all the things the same, so they are going to be productive, more productive, but not much more the change than before, right? So then the extra output produced from additional unit of capital falls, because workers already have capital to produce goods and services. Given them more capital can increase production but slightly. So is what we call diminishing returns. In terms of a graph, to grasp better the idea, we have in y-axis the output per worker. So imagine anything you want, as shoes, as computers, as hamburgers, whatever, this is the output. And this is the capital per worker, so this should be the machine. At the very beginning, when you didn't have any machine, naturally someone provided you machine to produce. This increase from this to this, as you can see, the slope is huge. It's extremely, it's like the slope is extremely high. Here is kind of getting flatter. So then even we have an increase in capital, but you remain all the staff exactly the same, you still have an increase. But this increase is naturally lower. Then this higher saving rate leads to higher level of productivity and income, but no higher growth in these variables, because naturally there is one point that the increase should be even close to zero. So as you can see, countries with higher stock of capital, it's kind of difficult to increase. However, poor countries, so they have a low quantity of capital, they can make an exponential increase with just like some accumulation of capital. So because at the end of the day, poor countries, they don't have usual appropriate tools or use of technological advance to produce goods. So then a small capital investment will boost productivity. Well, the conclusion should be like workers in richer countries, the capital per worker is high. So more capital should be a slight effect in productivity. The other side should be the countries that they are poor because they tend to grow faster than rich countries. It's what we call the catch-up effect. However, this catch-up effect could last a lot because sometimes even the poor countries they don't increase. So comparison of these two countries should be USA between 1960s and 1990s, between those countries, South Korea and USA, because they, for example, they devote similar share to investment from GDP, so accumulation of capital, and we have an increase of 2% on average for USA, and we have the 6% for South Korea. It's what we call the catch effect. So it's like, for example, a student that earned a most improved award but is not the best student, just like because he or she was the worst ever, but she has an important increase. So this is the situation that he can be awarded with the most improved, because the situation from the beginning to the final point was huge than other people. Then other way that public policy different from investment can promote economic growth. This is what we call investment from abroad. So investment for foreigners. So for example, Ford Motor Company car factory in Mexico, when they established here in Mexico, naturally this spillover effect because they start to consume more goods and services in order to set up this fabric. Naturally, workers, naturally, all the salaries those workers they will consume. So this is like spillover effect. So this is what we call foreign direct investment, when this is kind of constant. Other way of investment from abroad should be stocks of a Mexican company bought by American person. So it's what we call foreign portfolio investment. So then we are increasing stock of capital in Mexico. And remember, here is an important difference of effect part of the GNP and not GDP. Remember, the GDP is the income by residents and non-residents. However, the GNP considers the residents of a country home and abroad. So for example, now Chucky Lozano, which is a great soccer player, he is going to earn a lot of money in Napoli. It goes to the GDP of Italy, naturally, because this is the income of that guy that he's going to start to consume over there. However, these belong to the GNP of Mexico. Then, naturally, the car factory to some non-residents, and GNP increases less because some money is taken to Americans back to USA. So this is one way to grow despite of the money that is taken out. Obviously, there is an important improve in the techniques, and at the end of the day, the country can learn state-of-art technologies, and maybe one day they can produce the same goods, but with own production, for example. So some institutes that promote this kind of activities from developed countries to poor countries are the World Bank and the Fund Monetary Internationals, because they encourage the flow of capital to poor countries. And those institutions they established after World War II. Then other part different from investment, different from investment from abroad, we have education. Education is simply investment in human capital. So then, for example, USA each year of schooling is around improve around 10% of total income. So anytime you study 1 year more, you will face a 10% income higher on average. The point is like less developed country gap in income is larger. So because we have like some specialized people and some others that they are even illiterate, so naturally there is a big gap. So for this situation, the return of studying just 1 year is kind of huge. However, there is a huge trade-off as well because they cannot study because they need to support family and they need to work. Then poor countries children need to work to support their families. But education per se is not just human capital, but we have as well an externalities. Because when one people develop an idea, develop a better product, more people will consume it, will get it, and will face a standard of living. So this is education externalities. For this reason, government can provide important subsidies to people to encourage studying, to avoid working when they are children or when they are even teenagers. But the point here is like there is a brain drain. The brain drain are all qualified workers that they unfortunately they need to go out abroad. So then this is an important fact because all people that they come from poor countries, they prefer work for developed countries because they provide better standard of living, and if they return to their home countries, they cannot get the same standard of living. Other important fact of government is health and nutrition, simply because healthier workers are more productive. And nations develop economically. For example, people get taller, right? So as you can see here, a normal example of Great Britain. So calorie intake rose by 26% and the average man rose by 3.6 inches. And South Korea, for example, with increase was kind of huge, and then it was associated naturally with economic growth. So actually one important academic professor was Robert Fogel. Actually he won Nobel Prize in 1993 because of his studies related with nutrition and economic conditions, economic growth associated with health and nutrition. So, for example, malnutrition is rare in developed countries. However, right now we are facing obesity as the main issue. So we are facing here a health and wealth, a bidirectional relationship. So you're healthier, you're wealthier. However, there is sometimes a vice because if you are not healthy, naturally you cannot produce anything, so you will be poor. So then the idea is to create better policies to create a virtuous circle. So provide better health institutions, healthcare for all people. Naturally will provide at certain point wealth for the economy. So other important thing that maybe is one of the most important, I would say, is the property rights and political stability. So then you know that all production arises from the simple interaction between supply and demand. So then firms and individuals. So for example, when you buy a car, you are not just buying this car. You are supporting first the car dealer, second, the car manufacturer, third, steel company, Fourth, iron ore mining, etc. So then the property rights and political stability provides a perfect combination of between firms and consumers, because all the transaction can be regulated by market prices. And then all the situation should be balanced between supply and demand, and the invisible hand will work. This property right we can define as the ability of people to exercise authority over the resource they own. So naturally, if I have a car, I can sell it. If I have a house, I can sell it. For example, if a mining company that they are in a specific place, they face insecurity because the output, for example, should be stolen, they won't produce anymore. So this market will be cleared, will be zero. So then definitely is an issue. So the courts needs to in some way discourage theft. Then definitely there is a difference, huge difference between developed countries and poor countries. Unfortunately, for example, in Mexico, I get robbed several times. And when I lived in Europe, for example, I didn't experience that. Obviously, you can experience that in Europe as well, but maybe in less quantity. So then this is something that's really important for a country. And the corruption naturally discourages domestic saving and investment from abroad, because some firms they doubt about investing in some countries if they don't believe that the firms or the regulatory framework that this country has can provide some certainty for the investment they are going to produce. Because if it's not the case, they prefer avoid investing in those countries to work in others. So a political stability provides uncertainty from property rights respect. For example, Colombia, naturally, if they are facing a guerrillas and problems of arms and guns and conflicted war, internal war there, naturally, some tourism firms that maybe they would invest in those places, they wouldn't or they won't do it, because there is not guarantee that this should be respected the property right. So other important fact should be the free trade. Sometimes some countries they believe that they can protect national industry without importing goods. However, throughout history, this mechanism has not provided good results. So at the end of the day, the conclusion is like better to integrate economy to the world. So because international trade in goods and services can improve the economic well-being. For example, if you export wheat and import textiles, so it looks like technology for turning wheat into textiles, but you don't have the technology for textiles. So if one region restricts trade, they need to be self-sufficient in order to produce all goods. Definitely should be something bad, because sometimes you need to specialize in some specific good, as we saw in the first chapters. So then should be something really bad. The standard of living will decrease. So the trade determined by government, but also by geography. Because actually, for example, there is a study that most important countries they are close to the coast because they have the possibility to make trade easier. So they experiment better standard of living. Then other part should be research and development, because we already know that technological knowledge has advanced, and we have inventions that they come from individuals and firms, but those should be promoted by public sectors. So in that way, provide subsidies, provide money to different investigations or different research places. And then afterwards, when the knowledge could be a public good. So someone invented, but maybe after a while it could be common knowledge for all people. For example, the situation of Air Force and NASA, that those programs are the most important around the world just because there is an important support from American government. And important is should be a patent. Remember, a patent is exclusivity that you provide to one individual, one firm, to use this product just like a monopoly for a couple of years, couple of months. So certain quantity limited of time, because this will provide an incentive to produce goods and to experiment important profits from this invention, and afterwards when this expired, this should be used for all people. Other important part of the public policy in economic growth is the population growth. So it is expected that large population provide more labor force. A normal example is China with more than 1,000 million people, is what we call 1 billion, right? Higher than 1 billion of people. However, it does not mean higher standard of living. So there is some important fact that we need to take into account. The first is the stretching of natural resources, something that is really hot now and something that should be really important to the next years in order to keep our human being in life. So the first guy that started concerned about the situation was Thomas Robert Malthus. Not a guy really optimistic, more pessimistic, because he tried to predict that due to overpopulation, people will stay in poverty like all time, and any help from government will be vain, will be not important, will not significant, because give them possibility to have more children. So then actually the situation was definitely the opposite, because even the huge increase in population was a higher increase in technological advance. So then other important fact is that when you have more population, you are diluting the capital stock, because you need to split the capital stock between more people. So this should be the case. And then the high growth in poor countries can be an issue for improving standard of living. Other part of this situation of population growth and the public policy is promoting technological process. So then when we have more people, naturally it's expected to have more people, more scientists, more investors, more engineers. That's true. However, if the government doesn't invest in education, you can have bunch of people, but if you don't invest in them, you're going not to have more scientists, investors, engineers. Just the case of Hungary, for example, they don't have a huge population, however they have had like the higher Nobel Prize per capita or around the world. So okay, it's true that we have more people, but it doesn't mean that we are going to have more scientists. For example, if you are talking about China and you are talking about soccer, because of population, China should be the best team in the world. That's not true. Even it's so hard that they go to the World Cup. Different case, for example, Uruguay. Uruguay, for example, Uruguay is a country that they don't have more than 3 million people, but due to the public policy in sports and the culture of soccer, they have really good players. So then this is not a case. But actually, the idea is like Kremer provides an article that now that we are having more people, we tend to have more technological advance. And then in other interesting cases, like some isolated groups and people that they have less population, as the example of Europe, that they have all concentration of people and communication between them, they have different, like a lot of significant or outstanding progress, them. But some isolated groups that they lived in some specific island, for example, they didn't reach even tools or even fire, for example, at the same time. So for this reason, more people can bring more ideas. Then remember that as a conclusion, the 10 principles of economics. So the point here is ability to produce goods and services to a standard of living. And we need to add definitely with sustainable practice, obviously, because otherwise we're going to go to a hole with a real GDP high, but even without breathing. So this is something that should be added here. And definitely there is not strictly receipt for the government as the role that they have to take in order to reach better standard of living. It's really subtle, otherwise all people or all countries should have a good standard of living. And then the important part of the invisible hand and property rights to establish an important framework for economic growth. So after setting up this, we're going to move as usual with the exercises, and I hope you have better understanding of economic growth and the factors to have better standard of living. Thank you so much. I hope you comment this video and you have some ideas, some other topics here. I really appreciate. So remember that subtle, maybe something that you can see improved. This is more than received. So thank you so much. See you next time. Bye bye.